Whoever loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words. Yet the word you hear is not mine, but that of the Father who sent me. I have told you this while I am with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, who the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I told you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You hear me tell you, I am going away and I will come back to you. If you love me, you would rejoice that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I have told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We started 3 minutes late, so I get an extra 3 minutes, okay? Louis, this joke's for you. I normally don't start my homilies with a joke because we were told in the seminary that one joke a year is enough, and the only time you tell a joke really is Resurrection Sunday when Christ is resurrected, because the whole church is supposed to ring out with joy. And most of the time, of course, you see people not smiling or happy to be in the house of God, but oh my God, let me get there on time and get out of here as quick as possible, and the long faces that come with it. So I thought, since we probably have a lot of visitors here, I'd tell you a joke, but it's for Louis. He's our choir director, by the way. It's called hymn number 365. A minister was completing a temperance sermon. With great emphasis, he said, "If I had all the beer in the world, I'd take it and pour it out into the river." With even greater emphasis, he said, "And if I had all the wine in the world, I'd take it and pour it into the river." And finally, shaking his fist in the air, he said, "If I had all the whiskey in the world, I'd take it and pour it into the river." I guess we could include moonshine in that as well. So, sermon complete, he sat down. The choir director stood very cautiously and with a smile said, "For our closing hymn, let us sing hymn number 365. Shall we gather at the river?" Ha! It's not a song we sing in the Catholic Church usually. Louis, that was for you. Something I've learned over the years, and it's been made more aware to me more recently, as I did a homily last week on St. John Marie Vianney, who is a patron saint of parish priests. We had this week his incorrupt heart in the diocese. We had a special mass on Thursday at 12 o'clock with the bishop and all the priests of the diocese, with the incorrupt heart of St. John Marie Vianney being present. And I told the congregation the story. And a lot of our parishioners actually went, and I thought that was rather nice. So today I want to tell you a story of another saint. We sort of have lost the understanding. If you go to the daily masses, you'll get the lives of the saints, at least in this parish you do. But on Sundays, normally, the saints are sort of kind of pushed aside. But you have to remember the saints are an example to us. God gave them to us to remind us that even ordinary people with ordinary lives or difficult lives are called to become holy and become saints. And this week, the church celebrated the feast of St. Rita of Kasha. Her feast day was May 22nd, which is on Wednesday. Very, very unique story of a unique human being. When she was a young girl, she dedicated her life to Christ. She was very pious. Story has it that one day her mother, having her in her room, opened the windows, and it was a hot day, and she put the baby's crib by the window so she could get some of the wind coming in through the window. When she came back in later on, she noticed that the baby was giggling, even though it was asleep. And she looked and she noticed something very unusual. There were white bees going in and out of her mouth, coming in through the window. She had never seen a white bee before. Have you? I haven't. She had never seen a white bee before. But you got to remember now, in the Middle Ages, the bee was symbolic of the honey that God deposits into the soul to sweeten the human being, to sweeten the soul of the human being. The mother probably, because St. Rita died in 1457, probably would have understood at least what was taking place. Her mother didn't close the window and scream and said, "Oh my God," the bees never stung Rita. She grew up very pious. She wanted to join a convent, the convent in Kasha, which was Augustinian nuns. When she was a young girl, her mother and father said to her, "No, we don't want you to go in a convent, we want you to get married." And out of obedience to the fourth commandment, which is so pushed to the side today by many people, adults included, honor thy mother and thy father. She put her own will aside of going into a monastery and got married. She didn't want it. She accepted the choice of her parents. And for the next 17 years, she was married. Her husband was a brutal man. He was known as the most violent man in the entire area. Whenever he got paid, he would go to the local pub and drink all the money away. Rita would have nothing to feed to her two baby boys, nothing to feed to her boys as they grew. She would always rely on the mercy of God, the generosity of others. Her husband would come home and abuse her. He was just plain mean guy. And for 17 years, she put up with that without a complaint ever from her lips. She would serve him quietly, whatever he asked for. She did as a humble servant would do for Christ. And that's how she saw it. But that desire for being in a convent never died within her. It was always there. And she prayed that one day it might happen. Well, after 17 years of marriage, her husband one night in a drunken brawl in a bar got himself into a duel and was killed. They buried him. She didn't even ask what happened. She left it all in the hands of God. Then she discovered her two sons were on their way, riding two horses, to take vengeance on a man who shot him. St. Rita, getting on her knees, said to God, "Lord, please don't let my two sons offend you by taking out vengeance and committing the sin of revenge." And the two boys, the two younger, well, they weren't men yet, but the two boys fell off their horses at the same time, broke their necks, and died. She didn't want them. She didn't pray for them to be dead. She simply wanted them not to commit that sin. Now, all of a sudden, God had cleared her path. So she thought that she could go to the monastery up in Kasha, where the Augustinian nuns were, and enter the monastery. She knocked on the door, and she asked if she could be admitted. She sat down with Mother Superior. And Mother Superior, knowing that she'd been married to this most violent man, and she wasn't a virgin, because only virgins entered monasteries at that time at a very young age, sometimes even the age of 5. forbade her to enter the monastery, and she was crushed. So she prayed. She never gave up hope. One day, Mother Superior, who slept with the key to the chapel on her, opened the door in the morning for the sisters to go in and pray their morning prayers. And there was St. Rita on her knees in prayer. Mother Superior walks over to her and says, "How did you get in here? I have the only key." And she didn't answer her. So Mother Superior said, "Get out." So she got out humbly. Some days later, the same thing happened. Mother Superior now clutched the key at night just to make sure nobody was slipping it off her neck. And there was St. Rita again, the second time. This time she didn't ask her how she got in there. She just told her to get out, and she got out. A couple of days later, a third time. St. Rita was in the chapel when she unlocked the door. And Mother Superior finally realized that maybe there was more to the story here than she could understand. How was Rita getting into the church? Unless there was some supernatural force that was putting her there. There was no other way to explain how she got there. The monastery was locked. The chapel was locked. So Rita was accepted into the monastery, and she lived there for the next 40 years as a nun, growing in holiness and sanctity. The sisters always abused her because she wasn't supposed to be there. She took everything in kindness, never said a bad word. And one day when a preacher came to preach on the Passion of Christ, it seems that a piece of thorn from the crown of thorns dislodged itself from the crucifix and went straight into her forehead. If you've ever seen a statue of St. Rita, you'll always see that crown implanted on her forehead. She would bear that thorn for the rest of her life, and it was painful. It was painful. It would even get to the point where it would smell so bad they would have to isolate her from the community. And one time the sisters made a trip to Rome to see the Holy Father, and she asked Jesus to please take it away so she could make the trip with the sisters. He did. She went. She came back. Immediately the thorn came back. She had it till the day she died. She kept meditating on the Passion. She would often go into ecstasy in her prayers. She would levitate off the ground. And the sisters began to realize that just maybe they had a saint on their hands. One day, Mother Superior came into her room and gave her a stick, a dead stick, something she had found in the yard. And she said to her, "Go outside and plant it, and let's see if it grows. I want you to water it every day." Now, most anybody would have said, "This is nuts. This is a dead twig." But Rita, out of obedience, watered that twig every day. All of a sudden, that twig came to life. It began to bear roses. Some of the most beautiful smelling roses ever. And the sisters noticed that there was white bees pollinating this rose bush. And they discovered in the side of the monastery a hole about that big, where the bees had made their nest. They didn't try to kill them. They left them alone. Well, the sisters and people in the community began to realize maybe there's something supernatural here. They began to pick the leaves of the roses off the bush. People became healed. The crowd started to come. And the rose bush kept growing. Today, if you go there today, the rose bush is that thick. I've been there twice. I've seen it. The little hole for the white bees is still there. They still pollinate that rose bush. The rose bush is huge. It's like a tree. They had a fence around it. You couldn't get your hands through it, but for some reason or another, I was able to get a piece of the bark of that little rose bush, big rose bush. I told Rita I just wanted to have a little bark. If nothing else, if I couldn't have the roses, then I'll get a piece of bark. The sisters actually give out the rose petals now anyways, as long as they have them. St. Rita would die. Like I said, she lived 40 years. Her body was found incorrupt. It gave off the odor of roses. But before she died, on a deathbed, she asked somebody who had come to visit her to go out to the rose bush and get her a rose. Now, you got to remember, it's winter time. It's winter time. They're in a mountain area. There's no roses growing. And he looked at her and thought for a moment she must be delirious. But out of obedience and love for her, he went out to the rose bush, and there was one rose blooming. One rose. Needless to say, he was shocked, but he picked it and gave it to her. And she asked him then to go out to the backyard and get a fig off of the fig tree. Figs weren't blossoming at that time either. He found 2 of them on the tree. He brought them and gave it to her, and she died. My brothers and sisters in Christ, I tell you that story. Having been to Kasha, having prayed at the tomb of St. Rita, she was an ordinary woman with extraordinary graces. But she was open to the love of God. She had a yearning desire for God in her being. And she never lost that, no matter how difficult life became for her, especially through her husband. We often think we have difficult spouses. Read the life of St. Monica. Her husband, Patriscus, was a Roman atheist, worshipped pagan gods, made fun of her religion, abused her emotionally. The mother-in-law was 10 times worse than Patriscus was. But you see, the saints persevered. Their love for God always came through loud and clear in every situation. In the early church, a lot of Christians found themselves betrayed without ever saying a word. The reason for it being love radiated from them. They didn't participate in the orgies of the Romans. They didn't go to the Colosseums. And when they went to the marketplace, they would dress modestly. And people started pointing fingers at them. That must be one of them. And many of them were betrayed simply by their behavior, without ever saying a word. Where are our Catholics today? Will somebody look at you and say, "You're a Catholic"? I can tell. Because we're different from the world, at least we're supposed to be. Our entire life is a mystery. Our entire life is about sainthood. If you think your life is about something else, you're crazy. That it isn't about building that big house and having many cars and a better job and $1 million in the bank. It isn't about any of that. It's about loving God and being grateful for all the things He gives to us, even if I have nothing. Loving God first and foremost. And if you're in a difficult relationship, or you have difficult people in your life. St. Rita is a saint of the impossible cases. I wonder why, huh? She never gave up. She showed nothing but charity to a brutal, brutal man who brutalized her, who was her husband. Nothing but love. How do we often treat others? But you see, I've learned, like I said, I've learned to understand that it's good every once in a while to talk about the saints because they're an example. God has given them to us. He's plucked them out of the ordinary life and the ordinary world and struggles. In the middle of all of those struggles and ordinary life, they became saints. We can't run from that. So I leave you with that to think about today, about St. Rita. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives it, do I give it to you. Christ came in person to bestow his peace after the resurrection. First thing he says to his apostles, peace be with you. This was not the peace of just being happy or fulfilled. It is a peace of what we call the tranquility of order interiorly. Even a robber can be at peace with his spoils because he got away with it. This peace can only be received from God. It's in the 8 Beatitudes as well. Blessed are the peacemakers. It isn't about somebody sitting down and making peace between the Hatfield and the McCoys. It's about the peace that the human being has within because sin disorders the human being. It disorders him. To be at peace with God and with neighbor orders the human being in the right direction. That takes humility. It takes a subordination of body and mind and all the senses to reason. As I said last week, it seems we're living in a time where people are so unreasonable. We've lost the ability to reason through things. We simply respond emotionally, and that's all we do. That's all we have. It's not a thought. It's just an emotion. Emotions are appetites. Like I said last week, they always long to be fulfilled in some way or another. Christ wants us to have that peace. The only way we can have that peace is to get rid of those things that keep us from growing in holiness and to take advantage of the grace that God gives to us, most of all in the sacraments, the Holy Eucharist when he is present. Body, blood, soul, and divinity comes into our being. You see, the peace externally can't fulfill us. Only the absolute peace, Jesus Christ, can fulfill the human being. Even the name Jerusalem means city of peace because a king of peace is there. I'm not talking about Jerusalem, longitude and latitude. This is the city of peace here, Jerusalem. This is the house of bread, Bethlehem. The word Bethlehem means house of bread. This is where the bread is received, the body and blood of Christ. God comes to make his home within. And I think our translations, whoever keeps my Father, will come to make our dwelling with him. Well, there's 2 other words that kind of follow that they didn't include. We will make our dwelling with him. It's like that poem that many of us like probably so very much, Footprints. Lord, where were you when I was in trouble? There was only, I needed you so much, and I couldn't sense you, I couldn't see you or whatever. And you see one set of footprints is, then I was carrying you. Well, it's a little theologically off track. Because the next 2 words that he says, not only with you, but within. We will come to make a home within you. The word Emmanuel, which I often talk about at Christmas time, God is with us, poorly translated Aramaic word. God is with us? No, it's not what it means. The word itself is very simple. God within. One of the unique mysteries of Catholicism is that God comes to dwell within. I don't have to eat these pages. I don't have to read the Bible 1,000 times. I can read the Bible. I will never be able to receive Christ in the same way as I receive him when he's present, body, blood, soul, and divinity, the Eucharistic Lord.